I like to take it back to what might be argumentatively the golden age of console gaming, back to the 80s and 90s, late 80s, all throughout the 90s. If you weren't there at the time, try and use your imagination. If you were there, try and overcome your dementia and stay with me. Back during this era, every new console generation launch was a quantum leap forward in game. The Nintendo in 1985 brought 8-bit gaming to life. And again, for those who aren't initiated, go back and look at the original Atari compared to Nintendo, the original Nintendo. It's night and day. The quality of what you're getting in both games and graphics. Legend of Zelda on Nintendo was the first game to actually let you save your progress. Now, this is different from when you save your high scores, like in arcades or everything like that. This actually lets you save your progress. And they did this by putting a small coin cell battery in the cartridge with your with the game board. So what this meant is you no longer had to beat the game in one sitting. They could make a complex, intricate story and puzzles and dungeons that you can beat over the course of, let's say, a week or a month or 6 months, which was never done before up to this point on the Nintendo. But wait, there's more. On the Super Nintendo in 1990, which 5 years after the Nintendo's release, they came out with 16-bit graphics and Mode 7 scaling for pseudo 3D effects, which came with it much better sound and even, sort of makeshift physics engines, like in Super Mario Brothers on the Super Nintendo. If you remember that game, it had some pretty cool momentum mechanics. Even Nintendo, the Super Mario Bros. On Nintendo did the same thing, but on the Super Nintendo, it went to the next level. If you recall, you had to run at a certain speed. There's a little bar at the bottom of the screen, and once you got to that point, you had like the cape, you could fly. But before that, you couldn't do it. These things are innovations. But there is even more. The Sega Saturn and PlayStation were their main focus was 3D graphics. All right. If you remember back then, it was these blocky polygon people. Final Fantasy VII is what comes to mind. Everything's a sharp spike, which at the time was really cool. I mean, they did amazing things with that art style. Don't get me wrong. Then they went to the Dreamcast and PlayStation 2 smooth 3D models. They also had DVD features. You could put DVDs in the consoles and play them. And some games even had online capabilities. The consoles themselves could play online. Even though back then it wasn't really popular to do, you still did it if you wanted to. The PlayStation 2 launched in 2000 and it actually sold over 155 million units. A time where you still got beat up in school for playing video games. When you told your girlfriend you're going over to someone's house to play, let's say Tekken, she'd look at you with a disgusted look in her face as she realizes that you were a nerd. Yeah, you really were a nerd back then if you played video games. Now, everybody plays video games. But I think the PlayStation 2 was one of the highest selling systems of all time. A time where video games were not even as popular as they are now. So the PlayStation 2 comes out. It's groundbreaking. It's a media center and a gaming system. And it has these groundbreaking titles like Grand Theft Auto 3, which redefined how people approach games. And so everything we talked to up far were not only technical upgrades. These upgrades and innovations transformed the way you viewed games. We went from 2D to 3D in that time, in the mid-90s. And some people say that's the biggest leap we've taken. Though in hindsight, I think we all can agree that graphical upgrades is not really what we're looking for in games. It's everything behind the scenes that came with those 3D graphics. gameplay innovations included. Biggest example I could probably give is when we talked about Super Mario Brother games. We went from, a 2D side-scrolling platformer to Super Mario 64, which was one of the most mind-blowing games to come out ever. If you if you were around at the time and you got your hands on Super Mario 64 for the first time, you didn't even know what to do with yourself with how many options they gave you to tackle levels or defeat bosses or just to fool around and explore. So now that we've kind of explored the late 80s and mid 90s, or in all of the 90s, let's fast forward back to today. Okay, where you and I both are. Where is gaming now? I think we can agree that the excitement has fizzled. Again, if you weren't there, imagine the things I talked about, experiencing them for the first time, right? And if you were there, old timer, try and plug your memory and relive some of those moments. The modern era of gaming, right? Well, we'll talk about the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, which released in 2013. Real quick, just because I want to land my point home. I'm going to read some technical specs. Don't take them to heart. Just kind of keep them in mind. PlayStation 4 launched with 1.8 teraflops GPU, 8 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM, and a hard drive for slow loads. The PlayStation 5 released with 10.28 teraflops, a 16 gigabyte GDDR6 RAM, and a custom solid-state drive for, almost instantaneous loading. It's pretty good. It was much better than the PlayStation 4. And on paper, these things sound magnificent. They sound great. But that's when we're going to go into practice. So many game launches for the PlayStation 5 are cross-gen compatible. So the PlayStation 5 versions usually run at higher frame rates and resolutions, such as 60 on the PlayStation 5 instead of 30, or 4K on the PlayStation 5 instead of 1080. However, they are still technically limited to be compatible with the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, right? And we see a lot of people have never upgraded from PlayStation 4 to PlayStation 5. And the proof of that is in the sales for the PlayStation 5. So the PlayStation 4 sold about 115 million units. The PlayStation 5 sold about 74 million units. That means about 64% of PlayStation users never upgraded to the next generation. So doubling down on my point, the new generation consoles that we have right now are still placating to the previous generation, stunting innovation and growth for the consoles we purchased. A couple of game examples for this is one with Cyberpunk on the console. They tried so hard to make Cyberpunk compatible with the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One that, first of all, it barely ran on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One.
The game is fixed.
And it was so glitchy on the PlayStation 5 and Series X that it just didn't. It was the worst of both worlds. It was a game they were too advantageous for, and tried to put a square block into a round hole. Didn't work for either. To this day, you can't even. I know PlayStation offered refunds to people who bought it on the PlayStation 4. On the PlayStation 5, it runs okay now. However, if you compare it to what it's supposed to be like on the computer, it's night and day. They really screwed the pooch. Another one was Sparking Zero. At launch, they restricted you being able to play. You couldn't play couch co-op and play on any other map other than one called the Hyperbolic Time Chamber. And it wasn't until a bunch of people got mad about this and kind of proved for them that it could be done with mods, because they were claiming, the developers were claiming that it was too graphically intensive for the unit. And I really think they just didn't want to go through the time to make it compatible with things like Nintendo Switch. But they forced their hand and they did it anyway, showing that they could do it. They just chose not to. And that's more evidence of these developers not using the technology to their fullest. So what does that mean? It means that the developers of the consoles pull back and put less time in innovation because the game developers aren't using the technology. And now we have the Nintendo Switch to the Nintendo Switch 2, which feels just like a mid-generation refresh. Let's be honest. If you show me a Nintendo Switch 2 game without telling me it's a Nintendo Switch 2 game, from what I see, I couldn't guess otherwise. I probably think it's the original Nintendo Switch. I'd have to ask. I know they upped the screen the refresh rate. However, come on, that should have been done ages ago. 60 FPS is not mind-blowing anymore. That is well behind. Okay, the upgrade from the Wii to the Wii U had motion tablet controls, right? You know, you move it to the left or right and you interact with the game. And the DS and 3DS had an upgrade with a 3D screen. So, what are these guys doing today? Where is all this time and money going? Where are the exclusive games? And the only reason I think exclusive games are important is because it forces innovation, right? They're trying to make their system look the best it could possibly be, so they pump all this money into an exclusive game to make it the best it could be. I mean, as a consumer, I want these games to be on all the consoles. I don't want to be pigeonholed to one system. And I guess that is a big negative from back in the late 80s and all of the 90s, is if you wanted to play Zelda, well, you better have a Nintendo. You want to play Final Fantasy? You better have a PlayStation. So tell you what, Final Fantasy is not going to Nintendo. And as bad as that was, you know, that's not a plus in my opinion. Though the side effect was you got great games. So let me stop myself before I go off track one. Ultimately, we're getting way less for our money now. Including inflation, the older systems actually did cost a lot more than the ones they're releasing now. However, I don't like to count for inflation, because I think a lot of times they're taken out of context. Historically, entertainment was more expensive, but your living expenses were much more reasonable. And I don't think it's as simple as accounting for inflation. So, because that's what I believe, I'm just going to go off the original prices, and I'm not going to add inflation for some of these consoles that were released back in the day. But I do want to paint you a picture. PlayStation 3 launched at $600. PlayStation 4 launched at $400. And the PlayStation 5, if you could get them at the time of release, because they were so scarce, and scalpers were just all over them, you can get one for $500 if you bought it in the store. But now, mind you, a PlayStation 5 now costs $700. They raised the freaking price. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, if you could like and, subscribe for more content like this, I really would appreciate it. I like to talk and deep dive on things here on this channel. This is probably one of more shallow kind of coverings of a topic, but it was something that was been bugging me lately, and I wanted to discuss it. So, take care, guys, and later days.